And the gloves have been coming off for weeks in many of the major political races in Arkansas this year. We may have gotten down to the bare knuckles this week. Joining me at our political roundtable is Andrew DeMillo. He is the Capitol correspondent for the Associated Press. Janelle Lilley, KATV's lead Capitol reporter. Thank y'all for being here this morning.
Yep. Thank you. Our pleasure.
So should we start with the Roosevelts on PBS, or do you want to talk about something a little bit more exciting and more localized?
Miss America.
Yeah. There was a lot going on television this week, Roby.
Let's begin with the 2nd District congressional race. Pat Hayes, the Democrat, French Hill, the Republican. If for no other reason, let's talk about that race so we don't have to start with the Senate and the governor's race.
It is. It's heating up a little bit over there. There was some news that came out of that one this week, and I think the most bizarre piece of that news was we got the response before we got the attack that we were aware of. It was really interesting.
Yeah, so French Hill, Andrew, describe to viewers what happened. Basically, French Hill comes out with a TV commercial claiming he's been falsely attacked, and we hadn't seen the attack yet.
Yeah, he had done a TV ad that was basically saying he was responding to attacks from Pat Hayes, which struck some people as unusual because Hayes, up until that point, his TV ads had been kind of known for being these upbeat, kind of positive ads, featuring taking his grandkids to the ballpark and ice cream. And
vicious stuff there.
Yeah, and so it was kind of you had some people kind of raising an eyebrow of why what he was responding to exactly. The follow-up to that was Hayes actually releasing an ad that was an attack ad, going after Hill, trying to invoke Martha Schaffner and the scandal that led to her resignation and her conviction by pointing out that Hill had donated money to her campaign and that Treasurer's office had invested money with his bank. So there was an attack to respond to. It's just what didn't come before that ad from
In the grand
Hill.
scheme of things, it all played out. What was the reaction to the ad? I mean, I've heard a little bit of everything.
I have heard a little bit of everything, and of course, partisan. Depending on who you're talking to. I think one of the things that a lot of people had been saying about this race is how positive it had been up until that point, that there hadn't really been any attacks. And you were talking about the Hayes ads. Most of them were get-to-know-you ads until we took the switch this week. I heard across the board, responses from, of course, finally it's time to get down to, who we're electing and why, to, no, this wasn't an attack ad, it was a statement of facts. So it was very varied.
Yeah, I heard obviously unity from Republicans about it being over the top and unfair, and garbage was another word that was used by one of them. I found some split among Democrats, though. I found some Democrats that were not supportive of Hayes actually pivoting off of that positive message, and then others that, like you said, were under the impression it's time to get down to brass tacks.
Yeah, it was a very striking shift in tone for Hayes. Like we said before, his claim to fame was being the guy who had the few positive ads that you could see on TV in between all these other negative ads. Going from that to this ad that invoking Schaffner, trying to imply some kind of connection there with Hill, which struck a lot of people as just very just marked contrast from what we had seen before from Hayes.
Well, and Schaffner certainly has a lot of name recognition, right? It's been in the news constantly. If you've been, how long have we covered this, Andrew? I mean, for such a long time. So it's not just invoking some perceived scandal that might have happened at some point. It's something that we've reported on as far as her own case goes, separate from everything else. So tying it to something that people have heard a lot about is a very dramatic shift.
Yeah, and to be fair on it, Hill, his bank, they were never involved in that case.
Not in the scandal.
They weren't involved in that scandal at all, and that's one of the things that Hill has been pushing back on is, even though it's citing things like donations and these investments, it's implying some connection that's not really there.
Yeah. Let's shift to the governor's race, kind of a recovery week of sorts. The two major party candidates for governor had their televised debate a week ago, Friday night. They spent a lot of time on the campaign trail this week, but did anything major really happen?
I didn't see any responses to the debate from them. I was waiting very closely watching to see if any of them would pivot a little bit, shift a little bit, change their message to respond to something that maybe they thought their opponent got a good hit on, and I didn't see any of that. I feel like they just stayed with their messages, both of them, as they did in that debate.
Just required more daily reporting of covering the beat story, really.
Yeah, basically, the debate, as you've talked about before, it didn't really move the needle that much. Even though it was probably some of the most testy exchanges you've seen between Hutchinson and Ross. The only continuation we really saw of that is Hutchinson during the debate had tried to kind of present himself as a champion of the middle class. Something that was interesting this week is Paul Ryan coming into town, former vice presidential nominee, to endorse Hutchinson, and they spent a good amount of time talking about Ryan's proposals to tackle poverty, which kind of seemed aimed at trying to continue that whole middle class message that Hutchinson was trying to deliver.
Lower income class.
Well,
I mean, come on.
Absolutely.
Man of the people.
Reinforcement of what he's established already.
Yeah, let's take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back with the governor's race, some polling that has gone on this past week. We're going to talk about some money that is being spent in these races and maybe the minimum wage. So Andrew DeMillo, Janelle Lilley, and I am Roby Brock. This is Talk Business and Politics. We are back after the break.
As Arkansas's population grows, so do our energy demands. But with the right mix of resources, reliable, affordable power will always be a reality. These resources are all around us in our rivers, blowing through our trees, even right below our feet. The answer isn't focusing on one resource, it's embracing them all. The electric cooperatives of Arkansas know that a balanced approach to power builds our communities and powers our dreams. Visit themixmatters.com and see why there's power in knowledge.
All right, continuing our political roundtable, Andrew DeMillo, Capitol correspondent for the Associated Press, Janelle Lilley, KATV's lead Capitol reporter. Let's pick up with some polling that came out this week. Now, I like to center myself on our Talk Business and Politics and Hendricks polling, but there was some good polling that did come out this week in terms of stirring some debate. PPP polls comes out, shows Republicans with big leads. USA Today, Suffolk University comes out with a nonpartisan poll that shows this race is all gummed up, governor and Senate race. I'm not as fixated on the exact numbers. I'm more fixated on what's it kind of show when you put it in the context of all the other polls that are out there.
So the PPP poll was interesting because it had Hutchinson at a 44-38 lead, but in August when they did this earlier, it was 43-35. So the movement on that has been nothing.
Nil. Right.
Nothing.
And when you look at these other polls that have come out and you kind of aggregate all of this stuff, I mean, maybe it shows a candidate with a small lead, particularly a couple of the Republican candidates, but it also, to me, just shows that this race is still very tight, still within striking distance. Agree, disagree?
I definitely agree. And you're going to have people who are going to argue over the methodology and kind of which poll, but kind of the general theme we're seeing is this is still a very tight race. It's a huge contrast to what we saw 4 years ago with the Lincoln Bozeman race, where at this point it was pretty well decided.
At this point 4 years ago, my advice to John Bozeman was go on a desert island vacation and don't open your mouth. I mean, just go away until the last week of the campaign and come back and vote. So,
well, nobody's really nearing that 50% mark either, which I feel like is very interesting. When are the undecideds going to finally firm up and pick one camp or another?
I think there's a big school of thought, and I know I've gotten it from the campaigns themselves of the major races, that they're planning that it may not be a winner with 50% of the vote. A possibility with the third-party candidates out there in your estimation, either one of you?
I think a definite possibility. I know we'll get into some of this too. Then there may be some backlash to just kind of the constant ads and kind of barrage of ads, where you may have folks kind of going in a different direction that it could lead to that.
And the third-party candidates are, they're polling a little bit with those numbers that could inhibit the 50%. I think it's definitely a possibility.
I think the Green and Libertarian Party are going to get their 3% this year to qualify for the ballot going forward. So, well, let's talk about the money that is being spent, Andrew. The AP does some pretty exhaustive pieces this week in terms of how much money is pumped into Arkansas, particularly in the context of other states. Yeah. How big is it here in Arkansas?
Well, it's not going to come to a surprise to anyone who's watching TV who has to grab the remote and hit the mute button anytime a political ad comes on. But Arkansas has been hit particularly hard, especially for a state of its size, by political ads, especially in the Senate race. It's more than 38,000 ads that have been run by the candidates, outside groups, parties. And that's amounting to about $7 per voter that they're spending. That's twice the amount that's being spent per voter in states like North Carolina and Georgia, which are much more expensive Senate races. And we're also seeing that trickle down to other parts of the ballot too. The Center for Public Integrity did a report looking at spending on state level races where it's more than 16,000, nearly 17,000 ads that have run. And it's amounting to about $3 per voter that's being spent, and it's that's a triple-digit increase, 486% increase in ad spending on state-level races from 4 years ago.
Is that what surprised you the most when you're going through all that data?
That probably was what surprised me the most. With the state level, it's a different environment because we have to remember that Governor Beebe, when he was running against an underfunded candidate. Ads didn't really play that much of a factor. Republicans didn't field candidates in some statewide races like Attorney General. So I think it's a surprising number, but I think it also shows just how much of a consequential election both sides view this as, how much investment in this.
And I don't think we've seen. I think we're still going to see tens of millions between now and Election Day. So that number could easily come close to doubling from what we've seen in terms of what's already booked and what's going on in that
The reserves already,
Right.
made.
So,
Yeah.
and was that just broadcast TV, or was that looking at all different forms of?
It wasn't looking at things like, and it wasn't looking at future ad buys. And also it wasn't looking at radio ads, it wasn't looking at internet ads. When we did our story on the Senate race advertising, one of the complaints I heard from someone was, even if you go to YouTube to try to escape it, you end up getting a Senate ad. There was a guy complaining about watching Elvis Presley video, having to see a Senate ad.
I've heard from some Hulu viewers the same thing too.
Yeah.
All right, minimum wage, another interesting development this week. We saw a lawsuit filed by Jackson T. Stevens, heir to the Stevens fortune, big conservative Club for Growth supporter. This is a critical strategy for the Democrats to have this minimum wage issue on the ballot. It needs to be there in November for them in terms of their turnout effort. Do you think that this legal challenge is a significant one?
I think it's significant in the sense that it's something, it's a possibility. Nobody knows how the Supreme Court is going to act on this. And you and I were discussing earlier, it's certainly a lawsuit that's worth hearing. And I'm interested to see how it plays out and how quickly it plays out, because the movement on this is going to have to be pretty fast as well.
Yeah, two technicalities that they're basically wanting the Supreme Court to review. One is that there weren't enough signatures to qualify for the cure period, number one, and number two, that when these signatures were turned in, didn't qualify in terms of a constitutional threshold there. They missed it because of the July 4th holiday.
Which is a technicality that, it's interesting. Will the court hold them to it this time? Because there have been other ballot initiatives that have filed after a holiday as well and still been accepted. So I'm not really sure.
All right, 15 seconds. Wrap it up.
It's going to be a major case, especially with the alcohol measure too, which is also dealing with that deadline challenge. And we've got a very narrow window for the court to weigh in on this.
I still contend if they'll raise the minimum wage, I will drink more because I feel like I earned the minimum wage. Janelle Lilley, Andrew DeMillo, thank you very much for being with us this morning.